There is a wound you carry that will not close. You've tried everything: therapy, affirmations, shadow work, spiritual bypass, raw honesty, and still it returns. The same relationship pattern, the same self-sabotage, the same ache in the place where you should feel whole. Astrologers will tell you this wound has a name. It sits in your natal chart like a permanent scar. It is called Chiron, the wounded healer. The place you were broken so deeply that you spend your life teaching others how to heal what you yourself cannot seem to repair. But Neville Goddard would tell you something else entirely. He would tell you that the wound is not permanent, that the chart is not fate, that the only reason the wound persists is because you have assumed it into perpetuity, and that the moment you dare to assume wholeness, to feel yourself healed now, in defiance of every pattern and every transit and every psychological explanation, the subconscious mind must comply. The wound becomes the gift, not because you learn to live with it, but because you uncreate it. What if Chiron in your chart is not a life sentence, but an invitation to the most radical act of assumption you will ever perform? That is what we are here to explore. Welcome to Neville Goddard Universe. This is a channel devoted to the principle that Neville Goddard did not invent a new teaching. He remembered an old one. And that old teaching, the truth that consciousness is the only reality, and that assumption hardens into fact, has been whispered in every mystic tradition, every esoteric school, every sacred text that dared to say, "You are not the victim of the world, you are its author." Today we are beginning a series on one of the most misunderstood concepts in modern spirituality, the wounded healer. We are going to explore Chiron, the asteroid in astrology that marks where you are psychically injured, and where, supposedly, you are meant to teach from that injury. And we are going to set it beside Neville's doctrine of assumption, particularly his teaching on healing, to see if these two systems can speak to one another. Can you assume yourself whole in the face of a natal wound? Can the chart be revised? Can the gift emerge, not from the wound, but from its dissolution? This is part 1. We are going to lay the foundation carefully, because this is not a small question. This touches the root of identity, of fate, of whether you are bound by the patterns written in your stars, or whether, as Neville would insist, you are the one doing the writing. And if this exploration means something to you, if you've clicked on this video because you felt that wound and wondered if it was truly permanent, then I ask you to consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Not as a favor, but as a signal that tells the algorithm and the universe alike that there are minds ready for this work. Every subscription is a thread in a larger web, and I am grateful you are here. Let's begin. Neville Goddard taught that consciousness is the only reality. Not consciousness sand natter. Not consciousness influencing natter. Just consciousness. And if consciousness is all there is, then the things you experience, your body, your relationships, your health, your repeated patterns, are not happening to you. They are happening asa you. They are the outpicturing of states of consciousness you have accepted as true. This is easy enough to nod along to when we are talking about manifesting a new job or a relationship. But when it comes to healing, especially deep, recurring, seemingly structural wounds, the teaching demands something far more radical. Neville would say this: if you are ill, it is because you are assuming illness. If you are wounded, it is because you are assuming woundedness. Not on the surface, not in your desires, but in the deep substrate of your being, in the feeling state you return to when no one is watching. The wound persists not because it is real, but because you keep making it real by continuing to occupy the state that implies it. And so the question becomes, can you assume wholeness? Can you, right now, in defiance of every symptom and every memory and every diagnosis, feel yourself as whole? Can you close your eyes and inhabit the state of the healed version of yourself? Not as a distant hope, but as a present fact. Neville tells us in The Law and the Promise about a woman who had been crippled for years. Doctors had done what they could. The condition was chronic, and yet she began every night to imagine herself walking freely, not wishing, not hoping, but imagining from the end. She would feel the ground beneath her feet, the movement of her legs, the ease of her body. She would fall asleep in that assumption, and within weeks the body, which is nothing more than consciousness made dense, began to comply. This is not metaphor. This is not positive thinking. This is the mechanics of reality according to Neville. An assumption, though false if persisted in, will harden into fact. The wound you carry, no matter how old, no matter how validated by the world, is sustained by the state you are occupying. Change the state, and the wound dissolves, not because you healed it, but because you stopped creating it. Now let me take this deeper, because we are not just talking about physical illness. We are talking about psychic wounds, emotional patterns, the ways you sabotage love, the ways you collapse under pressure, the ways you return again and again to the same defeated feeling, no matter how much insight you gain. Neville would say these, too, are assumptions. They are states. And the reason they feel so intractable is not because they are woven into your soul or written in your stars. It is because you have identified with them so completely that you cannot see them as assumptions anymore. You think they are you, Goddess Boot, but they are not you. They are states you have worn so long the fabric has fused to your skin. And assumption is the solvent. In his late lectures, particularly in the 1970s, in those extraordinary talks he gave near the end of his life, Neville spoke often of Christ's healing miracles. He did not speak of them as historical events performed by an external savior. He spoke of them as demonstrations of a principle. When Christ said to the paralytic, "Rise, take up your bed and walk," he was not hoping the man would be healed. He was assuming the man whole. He saw him, in imagination, as already healed. And the man, meeting that assumption, became it. This is the power Neville is pointing you toward. Not the power to ask for healing. The power to assume it as done. You do not heal yourself. You become the version of you that was never wounded. And the subconscious mind, which does not argue, which does not care about the past or the diagnosis or the chart, must bring that version into being. This is the foundation. Hold it as we move now into the language of astrology, into Chiron, into the wound that is said to be unhealable. Because Neville would tell you, there is no such thing. In astrology, Chiron is called the wounded healer. It is a small body, technically a comet, orbiting between Saturn and Uranus. It was discovered in 1977, not ancient, but deeply resonant. And astrologers almost immediately recognized it as a symbol for something humanity had always known. The idea that we are most able to heal others in the place where we ourselves are most deeply broken. Chiron in your natal chart marks a wound, not a surface wound, a core S wound. The place where life hurt you so early, so profoundly, that it became part of the architecture of your psyche. For some, Chiron in the 4th house speaks to wounds around home, family, belonging. Chiron in the 7th, wounds around partnership and intimacy. Chiron in the 10th, wounds around visibility, authority, being seen. The modern astrological interpretation is this: you cannot heal the Chiron wound. You can only learn to live with it, to work through it, and eventually to teach others how to navigate the same territory. The wound becomes your gift, not because it closes, but because you become an expert in its landscape. This is a beautiful teaching in its own right. It honors suffering. It gives meaning to pain. It says, your wound is not meaningless. It is the source of your medicine. But listen closely, because here is where Neville and astrology begin to diverge. And that divergence is not a contradiction, but an opportunity. Neville would say, the wound is not structural. It is not fated. It is not written into the fabric of your soul by the position of a celestial body at the moment of your birth. It is an assumption. The chart, Neville would tell you, is not a map of what must be. It is a map of what is being assumed. The moment you were born, you entered a field of collective consciousness, a web of beliefs and patterns and inherited states. The chart describes the state complex you were born into. But you are not bound by it. You are the operant power. You are consciousness itself. And consciousness can always choose a new state. So Chiron in your chart does not doom you to carry a wound for life. It describes the shape of the assumption you were born into, the specific flavor of limitation, of lack, of injury that was active in your environment, and which you, as a newborn consciousness, absorbed and made your own. But assumptions can be changed. This is the convergence. Astrology names the wound with precision. Neville gives you the method to dissolve it. Let me say that again, because this is the heart of the episode. Astrology, through Chiron, can help you see the wound clearly. It can tell you, here, this is the place you have been bleeding. This is the story you have been telling yourself since before you had words for it. And Neville tells you, now assume it healed. Not someday, not after enough therapy or enough spiritual work or enough service to others. Now. The wounded healer teaching says the wound becomes the gift. Neville says the wound dissolves, and what remains is not the scar, but the wholeness that was always true beneath the assumption of injury. Do you see the radical difference? One teaching sanctifies the wound, the other uncreates it. And both can be true, depending on the level you are working from. If you remain in the state that implies the wound will indeed become your teaching. You will speak from it, heal from it, build a life around it. And there is honor in that. But if you dare to assume wholeness, to step into the state where the wound never happened, or where it happened and left no trace because you are not the person to whom it happened anymore, then you move beyond healing into something closer to resurrection. This is what Neville meant when he spoke of Christ's miracles. Christ did not slowly rehabilitate the leper. He assumed the leper whole, and the leprosy vanished. He did not counsel the blind man through his blindness. He assumed the man seeing, and sight appeared. These are not metaphors. They are demonstrations of the principle. An assumption, if sustained, will harden into fact. Your Chiron wound is sustained by the assumption that it is permanent. The moment you withdraw that assumption and replace it with the assumption of wholeness, the wound has no ground to stand on. The chart does not control you. You control the chart by controlling the state you occupy. And this is where the thumbnail lands. Chiron, your gift. Yes, but not because the wound remains. Because the wound, once dissolved through assumption, reveals the gift that was always underneath it, your power to assume, your power to create, your power to stand in a reality that tells you you are broken and say calmly with feeling, I am whole. That is the gift, not the wound, the overcoming of it through assumption. So, how do you do this? How do you take a wound that has been with you for decades, that astrologers have named and validated, that therapists have traced back to childhood, that you have built an identity around? How do you assume it dissolved? Let me walk you through this as Neville would. First, you must identify the wound, not in psychological detail. We are not here to excavate trauma. But you must know what state you are currently occupying. What is the Chiron wound telling you about yourself? Perhaps it is, I am unlovable. Or, I do not belong. Or, I am always abandoned. Or, I cannot be seen without being punished. You know the sentence. You have lived it. Now, here is the radical step. You are going to construct the opposite assumption, not as an affirmation, not as a hope, as a state you will occupy. If the wound says, I am unlovable, the assumption is, I am deeply loved, and I know it. If the wound says, I am always abandoned, the assumption is, I am held, and I rest in that holding. Do not argue with the wound. Do not try to convince yourself. Simply construct the sentence that describes the state of wholeness. Make it present tense. Make it felt. Now, tonight, before sleep. Neville's preferred time, because the subconscious is most impressionable as you drift. You are going to enter into the state of the assumption, imagined as real, or SATS. You will lie down, you will close your eyes, and you will imagine a scene that implies the assumption is true, not a scene of becoming whole. A scene that could only occur if you were already whole. Let's say your Chiron wound is around intimacy. Chiron in the 7th house, the fear of being truly seen and then rejected. The assumption you are constructing is, I am safe being fully seen, and I am loved as I am. Your scene might be this: you are lying in bed beside someone you love. Their hand is on your chest. You feel the warmth of their skin, the rise and fall of their breathing. And in your mind, you hear them say, or you simply know without words, I see all of you, and I love all of you, and I love all of you. You do not imagine this as a wish. You imagine it as a memory. You loop it gently. You feel the relief of it, the safety of it, the truth of it, and you fall asleep in that feeling. This is not visualization for the sake of future manifestation. This is revision of identity. You are inhabiting, even for a few minutes before sleep, the version of you who does not carry that wound. And the subconscious, which cannot tell the difference between imagined and real, begins to reorganize around that identity. You do this night after night, not with strain, not with desperation, with the calm persistence Neville always recommended. And here is what will happen. The outer world, which is only ever a mirror of inner states, will begin to shift. People will respond to you differently. Situations that used to trigger the wound will lose their charge. You will notice, almost by accident, that you are no longer collapsing in the old way. The wound is not healed by time or insight or even by service to others. It is dissolved by assumption. And here is where the astrological lens enriches the practice. Knowing your Chiron placement tells you what assumption to construct. It gives you the precise shape of the wound so that you can craft the precise shape of wholeness to replace it. Astrology becomes the diagnostic. Neville becomes the cure. You can also use revision, Neville's other great technique. If there is a specific memory tied to the Chiron wound, a moment of rejection, of abandonment, of humiliation, you can revise it. Not to deny it happened, but to reimagine it. You go back to that moment in imagination, you see it clearly, and then you change it. You imagine it ending differently. You imagine the love you needed being present. You imagine yourself held, seen, protected. You do this not to rewrite history, but to rewrite the meaning history has in your psyche. The past is not fixed. The past is a state of consciousness you keep re-entering. Revise the memory, and you revise the state. This is how the Chiron wound, which astrology says is permanent, is dissolved. Not by accepting it, but by assuming it never had the final word. You are not the wound. You are the consciousness that can choose, at any moment, to occupy a different state. Try it. Dare to assume it. See what happens when you stop negotiating with the wound and simply step into wholeness as though it were already true. Because according to Neville, it is. Step back with me for a moment, because what we are touching here is larger than astrology or Neville or even healing. We are touching the question of fate. Is your life determined by forces outside your control? The stars, your childhood, your DNA, your trauma? Or are you the operant power, the one who chooses and creates and assumes reality into being? Every spiritual tradition has wrestled with this. The Stoics spoke of amor fati, love of fate. The Buddhists speak of karma, the inherited consequences of past action. Astrology speaks of the natal chart as a map of soul contracts and lessons to be learned. And Neville comes along and says, there is no fate but assumption. But here is the beautiful thing, and this is what I want you to see. These teachings do not cancel each other out. They are describing different levels of reality. At one level, yes, there is a pattern. There is a karmic inheritance, a soul blueprint, a Chiron wound. You were born into a specific configuration of consciousness, and that configuration has shape and flavor and tendency. But at a deeper level, you are not subject to that pattern. You are the awareness in which the pattern appears, and awareness can always choose what it will identify with. Astrology, at its highest, does not say you are doomed. It says this is the shape of the assumption field you were born into. Now, what will you do with it? And Neville answers, I will assume something new. This is not denial. This is not spiritual bypass. This is the recognition that consciousness is senior to form. That the chart describes what is, but consciousness determines what will be. When these two systems converge, when you use astrology to see the wound with precision and Neville to dissolve it through assumption, you are not doing violence to either tradition. You are allowing them to complete one another. Astrology without assumption becomes deterministic. You are your chart, and your wound is your fate. Assumption without astrology can feel rootless, ungrounded, as though you are supposed to manifest in a vacuum with no understanding of the specific patterns you are working with. But together they become a kind of sacred technology. Astrology tells you where the work is. Neville tells you how to do the work. And the work is always the same, withdrawing assumption from the old state and investing it in the new. This is what the great mystics have always known. Whether they called it liberation, or salvation, or enlightenment, or awakening, they were pointing to the same truth: you are not the content of your life. You are the consciousness in which that content appears. And consciousness is free. The wound is not you. The chart is not you. The past is not you. You are the I am. And I am can assume anything. So here we are, at the end of the first part of this exploration. You came here, perhaps, because you have felt the weight of a wound you could not shake, because astrology told you it had a name, a place, a purpose, and you wondered if that meant it was permanent. And now you know it is not. The wound is real, the pain is real, the pattern is real, but reality is not final. Reality is fluid, because reality is consciousness, and consciousness moves where assumption moves. Chiron in your chart is not a sentence. It is a starting point. It shows you the shape of the assumption you were born into, the flavor of separation you inherited. But you are not here to carry that wound forever. You are here to discover that you have the power to assume it dissolved. And in that discovery, the wound does become a gift. Not because you learn to live with it, but because you learn that you were never bound by it in the first place. If this exploration has meant something to you, if you feel the resonance of these two systems speaking to one another, then I ask you to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Not as a formality, but as a way of saying yes to this work, to this inquiry, to the possibility that there is a deeper unity beneath all the traditions that have tried to name the mystery. Every like, every subscription, is a thread in a web we are weaving together, and I am grateful you are here. This is only part 1. In the next episode, we will go deeper still, into specific Chiron placements, into the anatomy of the wound, and into advanced techniques for dissolving what astrology says is permanent. But for now, you have everything you need. Tonight, before sleep, assume yourself whole, not healed, whole, as though the wound never defined you. Imagine a scene that implies it. Feel it. Let the subconscious take it in. Do not force, do not strive, just assume, and see what shifts. Neville always said, try it. So I say the same to you now. Try it. Not as an experiment, but as an act of creation. You are not hoping for wholeness. You are claiming it. You are stepping into the state where it was always true. And from that state, the world must rearrange itself to match. You are not the wound. You never were. You are the one who has been assuming the wound into existence. And now, you are the one who will assume it away. That is your power. That is your inheritance. That is the teaching Neville left you, and it is the teaching echoed in every star, every chart, every ancient map of the soul. Consciousness is the only reality, and you are that consciousness. So what will you assume tonight?